doing a standalone sermon on Hebrews, and next week I'm starting a new sermon series on the Gospel of John. But today I want to take a break and I want to look at this idea of Sabbath. And I think we need this idea of Sabbath because Sabbath is a day to hope. It's a day to dream. It's a day where God softens our heart. You know, this has been a tough year for Los Angeles. We started off the year with fires that devastated parts of LA. Recently, there have been a lot of anxiety. There have been protests. There have been ICE raids. A lot of people are anxious, upset. This last week, we saw some devastating floods in Texas. And this has been a difficult year. We live in this age of anxiety. And it's easy during these times to lose hope. So I want to talk to you about this hope that God has given to us. And He's given us a day to look forward called the Sabbath. It's a day for us to think and dream and regain our hope. So today as we look at Hebrews, we want to look at three ideas. One is our need for hope, the Sabbath as a day of hope, and how to stay hopeful. Let's start with this first idea of our need for hope. Today we're looking at the book of Hebrews. Hebrews was written by an author we don't know, actually. It's one of the only books in the Bible we don't know the author of. And the book of Hebrews was written to sleepy Christians, Christians who were spiritually hard-hearted. They had started believing God, but now they're drifting. And this letter of Hebrews is by and large a warning. One of the examples that Hebrews points to as a negative example is the wilderness generation. And that refers to Exodus. In the book of Exodus, God's people were slaves in Egypt. They were free labor for Pharaoh. He used them, exploited them. They did back-breaking work in the sun. They had no days off. And so they cried out to God, and God answered them by sending them Moses. Moses was the great deliverer. And God used Moses to free his people. He parted the Red Seas, and God led his people out of slavery, and they were going to go to the promised land. It was a place of rest. It was home. But before they got there, they had to wander through a wilderness for 40 long years. 40 years. Why did God do that? Why didn't God send them right from the Exodus right into the promised land? That's what you would expect. But no, God sent them into this wilderness. Why? Well, the answer was God was refining them. They had left Egypt, but they still had a lot of Egypt left in them. They had left slavery, but they had a spirit of slavery that was still in them. And God was using that place as a place of testing. The wilderness is a place of trials and temptation. It's not a place that you can live by yourself. That's why God had to miraculously airlift them food, water into the wilderness. The wilderness is hot. It's a place that is uncomfortable. The wilderness, they were always uprooting themselves, living in tents, moving. How did the God's people do in the wilderness? Well, in Hebrews 3, it says they did not do well. They did not pass the test. They hardened their hearts toward God. They were constantly complaining, grumbling against God. Many of them actually wanted to go back to Egypt. They said, man, it was better. We were better off in Egypt as slaves. In verse 8, it says their hearts became hard. Your heart is the center of your life. It's where your affections, your dreams happen. When your heart becomes hard, you become cynical. Become cynical about life. You stop believing God. You stop believing God is working in your life. What happened to that generation? Well, in verse 17, it says they all fell in the wilderness. Not one of them made it to the promised land. None of them made it home. They had a spectacular start, but they didn't follow through. They didn't end up reaching the promised land. The wilderness generation is a warning for us all. One of the key things the Bible says is that life is a wilderness. Life is filled with trials and temptations. So most of our life, we're going to feel uncomfortable. There's going to be difficult things in our life. There's going to be temptations, spiritual dryness, heartbreaks, church hurt, conflicts with people, spiritual dryness. It's easy when you go through the wilderness to get cynical. It's easy to be cynical about God, cynical about people, and to believe that God is not here. And we ask questions like, God, where are you? Why are you allowing me to go through this difficult thing? Why isn't God blessing me? He's blessing everyone else. Why not me? And it's easy in the wilderness to get hard-hearted. One of the major problems with the wilderness generation was that they were constantly looking backwards instead of looking forward. Many of them looked backwards toward Egypt. In Exodus 16:3, it says that the people were saying they were better off in Egypt. And they misremembered the past. They glamorized the past. They said, man, in Egypt, we are eating pots of meat. And we had all the breadsticks, endless breadsticks that we can want. And they look back at the past and they misremember, they glamorize their past. They're constantly looking backwards. Even though when you get to Exodus, when you really see what happened, they were slaves in Egypt. They did back-breaking labor. But they constantly look back. You know, many people are constantly looking backwards in their life. They're looking back at the good old days. They would look back at when you were in college, you were on fire for God. God was so good. God seemed to be blessing you. Many people also look at their past in regret. They think about all the different things they could have done different. And you imagine what your life would be if you had just made some different decisions. Russell Moore, he wrote a book called The Storm-Tossed Family. He talks about counseling hundreds of men and women who had committed adultery. And he says that what they all had in common was that their partners in adultery, they weren't more attractive than their current spouses. Most of them weren't. And most of them weren't the kind of people they'd actually want to spend the rest of their life with. He quotes a therapist who says this. She says, what's at work is not a search for a better lover or a better spouse, but for the unexplored self. And an affair is about nostalgia. The person who cheats is looking to reconnect with the person he or she was before the daily responsibility of working a job or maintaining a household. The question is, am I still the person I was back then? It's a desire to recapture the feeling of being a young adult, recapturing the drama of being wanted or pursuing someone. The person cheating is exploring an alternate universe of what if I made different choices? But tragically, when you go down that road, it leads to a lot of destruction, a lot of terrible things in its wake. If life is a wilderness, it's so hard. We're always going to face the temptation of, man, what if I made some different decisions? I wouldn't be in this wilderness now. It was so much better back then. I felt so much closer to God. God was moving in my life. It's so easy to look back. But the wilderness is a warning that it's not about looking back. If you constantly are looking back, your life is going to be filled of regret and bitterness. The people who look back, they're constantly complaining, constantly bitter about what had been done to them or what they did to themselves. But if you look forward, you can become a person of hope and a person of joy. Hebrews is a warning. Don't look back, look forward. Don't look at the past with regret. Look forward with anticipation. Well, how do we do that? And this is the second point. God gave us a Sabbath day as a day of hope. You know, God knows that life is hard. It's full of difficulties, of trials. It's so hard sometimes. So what did God do? He gave us this idea of the Sabbath. Sabbath in the Old Testament was a day off where everyone from the largest landowner to the lowest slave, everybody was given a day off. And what God was saying for them is that it wasn't like Egypt Slaves have no days off. You have to work overtime every day. But God was saying with the Sabbath, I'm not like that slave master in Egypt. No. And God is saying, you are not your job. You are not what you do. That doesn't define you. On the Sabbath, they remembered, man, I'm set free. I'm loved by God. The Sabbath was a day where everyone rested from the work and anxieties, and we came together as equals. We're all God's people. And we worshiped the Lord who loves us, who gave himself for us. But here in Hebrews, the Sabbath takes one final turn. Here in Hebrews, it says the Sabbath is not just about remembering our freedom, but it's a day of anticipation. It's a day of looking forward. After the wilderness generation died, a new generation came up. They actually entered the promised land. And remember, the promised land was their home. It was supposed to be their rest. From all the wilderness laborers and all the slavery, they're finally home. But Hebrews says that even when they reached the promised land, there was still a Sabbath. They were still calling it rest. There was still a rest to come. What was that about? And the idea there is the promised land wasn't the end game. That even the promised land was an anticipation. It was a type of heaven. It was a reminder, a physical, historic reminder that we're not home yet. That there is a day of rest. There's a land of milk and honey, a place of abundance that we all are looking forward to. The promised land is a signpost to a greater reality. So what is the Sabbath about? Well, in some sense, the Sabbath for New Testament Christians is Sunday because Jesus rose again from Sunday. He defeated sin and death. And from then on, all Christians started worshiping on Sunday because Sunday is our new Sabbath. Sunday is a day to remember that actually we are not our jobs. We're not how much work we have done. We're equal. All of God's people, we're equal. Sunday is a day of worship. It's a day to remember who we are. It's a day finally to remember where we are going. That's why on the Sabbath nobody worked, because in heaven we're not going to work. There's going to be no doctors or healthcare workers in heaven because everyone's going to have a perfect body. In heaven, there won't be deadlines, projects, Excel sheets. That'll all be passed. None of that's going to be in heaven. Heaven's going to be a day of ultimate rest. What do we do on the Sabbath if we're not working? Well, we worship. That's why heaven is a place of worship. We're going to be singing and rejoicing and celebrating. The Sabbath is supposed to be a preview of what is to come. Once a week, we're supposed to remember where we're going. We're not our past. We're not our jobs. We're not even our present. We are God's beloved and we're on our way home. God said, don't forget that. Use the Sabbath to remember where you are going. There's so much in this world that leads us to realize our need for Sabbath, our need for hope. One of those things is tragedy. I just got back from visiting my father. My father's in the Bay Area. Some of you know my mother passed away earlier this year. And my father was a widower. And he has his good days and his bad days. This last week, I grew up seeing my grandmother and my mother reading the Bible. But my dad never read the Bible. I had never actually one time saw my dad read. He's always reading the sports page. That's my dad. This last week, for the first time in my life, I woke in the morning, my dad's reading the Bible. I couldn't believe it. And I went to his room late at night, and he's listening to sermons on audio. I thought that was the most miraculous thing. We've been praying for that. One of the things that tragedy does is it helps us realize, man, this world is not it. That if we only have hope in this life, we're of all people to be pitied. But often God sends hard things in our life to help us to remember that this isn't it. This world is not our utopia. It's not our paradise. Keep on looking ahead. Instead of letting hard things harden your heart, let it soften your heart. Let it grow your anticipation for what is to truly come. Tragedy leads us to the story of the gospel. Very end of the Bible in Revelation 21, it says that God's going to come down. Heaven's going to come down into this earth. It says God's going to wipe every tear from our eye. God's promise is in the life to come, He's going to make everything right. He's going to wipe every tear from our eyes. I was reading this book by Ta-Nehisi Coates. He wrote this book called Between the World and Me. It's a letter to his son. And he's talking to his son about what he's learned in his life. And Coates says he didn't grow up in a Christian or religious household. But he says whenever he studies the civil rights movements, he always looks at pictures of these African Americans. They were faced with water hoses, dogs, batons, threatened with their life, their dignity. And he says whenever he looks at these pictures, he always looks at their eyes. And he realized, studying these pictures, that their eyes are always looking up. And he said, what are they looking at? And he realized they're looking up to God. That what gave these men and women the courage to stand against injustice was their eyes were looking up at God. They were looking up like Stephen did in Acts. They saw heaven opened up. And that gave them courage to endure abuse. Do you have that kind of hope? If all you have is hope in this life, I got bad news for you. You're going to grow cynical. You're going to be very angry. You're going to be disappointed. Because this world, there's not a lot of hope in it, just in and of itself. Hebrews tells us instead of looking back, we have to look forward. Instead of thinking about all the decisions you could have made, let all the discomfort in your life help you to realize this is not my home. If everything was perfect in your life, you would not want heaven. You'd be like, hey, this is good. I'm living the good life now. But those hard things lead you to God, and it leads you to remember your hope. So how do we grow in this hope? This is the final point. How to stay hopeful. You know, the idea of heaven can seem very abstract. You might think of heaven as some cloudy place where everyone's wearing white robes. It doesn't seem very real. Some people think heaven is just something people made up because they're afraid of death. It's pie in the sky. It's not real. That's why God gives us hope in the form of a person. We're going to look at John 1 next Sunday, but in John 1 it says that God, the Word, the glory, became flesh and dwelt amongst us. He pitched his tent amongst us. He came all the way down. The best way to explain heaven and think about heaven is that heaven has come down in Jesus. So if you want to look at what is heaven like, look at what Jesus is like. That'll give you an understanding of heaven. So what is Jesus like? Well, in Jesus' ministry, he healed the broken, people who are blind, who could not walk, people who are outcasts, people who are disabled. And what did he do to them? Well, he healed them. And that's what heaven's like. Heaven's going to be a place where we're all going to be healed. All of our physical ailments or pain or cancers or diseases, they'll be all gone in the presence of Jesus. But we'll all be healed also emotionally. So many of us have traumas and scars. We've been through some hard things. Revelation 21, it says God's going to wipe every tear from our eye. He's not just going to heal us physically, but emotionally. What was Jesus like? Well, he forgave people. Jesus loved eating with people who everyone thought were the worst people or the sinners, prostitutes, thieves, traitors. Jesus ate with them. Eating in that culture was a sign of solidarity. It was a sign of friendship. Jesus opened up the gospel, the good news. to the most broken people and accepted them by his grace. J.C. Ryle said that on the floor of hell is the word justice, but on the floor of heaven is the word grace. The English pastor and abolitionist John Newton, he was in one of his letters, he's writing to a young Christian who's struggling with the same sin again and again. And that man asked him, well, why do I struggle so much? And John Newton said, you know what? If God was all powerful, he would take that sin from you, wouldn't he? But the fact that he does not means there's a purpose in it. And he says one of the purposes with God allowing us to keep repeating the same mistakes, the same sin, is to help us to realize our need for grace. We realize in our addictions, in a rock bottom place, that God, I need your help. And the only way to heaven is not our goodness, but God's grace. And even our addictions, God is helping us, prepare us for this place where it's all grace. It's all God, nothing that we did. It's all his glory. But ultimately, Jesus teaches us that heaven is a place of perfect love. Jesus loved more than anything else. He loved the most broken, the most lost. But he showed his love not just with words, but by laying down his life for his people. God would pay the debt we could not pay. He died for us. He took our sin, the wrath of God in our place so that we can go free. Heaven is going to be a place of perfect love where we're going to experience the love of God. We'll never doubt it. God's also going to transform us so we become people who are perfectly loving. Heaven is going to be a place where everything we say or think or do will always be perfectly loving. Heaven will have no conflict, no wars, no divisions. It will be a place of perfect love where we receive the love of God perfectly and we love each other in a perfect way. We're going to be free from all of our addictions and our sins and our hang-ups. We're going to experience the love of God in the most profound ways. So how do we practice that hope of heaven? Well, we have to think about it, first of all. You know, if you're preparing for a vacation, you're always going to think about it. Sometimes the joy of a vacation is planning it out. Think about all the places you're going to go, the restaurants you're going to eat at. We have to dream about heaven. But ultimately, the way that we prepare for heaven is by clinging to Jesus. We said that Jesus explains heaven. In Hebrews 4:14, it says, don't let go of Jesus. Jesus passed through the heavens. Hold fast your confession. Hold on to Jesus. It says in Hebrews that Jesus is our sympathetic high priest, that when we struggle in the wilderness, Jesus understands it because he's been through the darkest wilderness. So go to Jesus in your wilderness because he's not going to condemn you. He's going to say, man, I get it. I've been there. I walked in your shoes. Let your suffering draw you into the suffering of Jesus. And whenever you feel pain or hardship or betrayal, let that lead you to understand the depths of Jesus' suffering, but understand that Jesus rose again and he conquered sin in the grave. And he's waiting and he will bring heaven down one day. Jesus turns our tears into joy. He makes us people of hope. Finally, in Hebrews 4:12-13, it says, we should not be weary. We should not have an unbelieving heart. Watch your heart. Don't let it get cynical. Don't let it get hard and jaded. Be very careful of that. But instead, it says, encourage one another as long as it's still called today. Keep on. We should tell each other, keep on going. In our community groups, in our small groups, as we struggle. We're not home yet. Keep on going. Scholar Richard Bauckham says the coming of the kingdom is both a desire we never reach and the goal we must anticipate. The resurrection shows that this present age is no final destination and this present age is no lost cause. We live in between times. We live with a realistic understanding of human sin, but a hope that God's grace and power are much greater. So as we close, are you looking back or are you looking forward? I was watching the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. And that movie is essentially about possibilities, the multiverse, that it runs through every different decision we could have made and the different people we could have become. And we're constantly wondering, well, what if I did this different? Married this other person, took another career path. Man, my life would be so much better. But the Bible tells us in Romans 8 that this actually, even if you had a billion different universes, this is your best life. You might say, well, it doesn't feel like my best life. I got a lot of bad things happening. I got a lot of stresses, a lot of anxieties. Well, if you realized that all of those broken things are there for a reason, God is helping you to realize, man, this is not it. And in midst of your darkness, God's light shines all the more brighter. You know, the stars are out all day. You just can't see it. The sun's overtaking it. But only in the darkness of night can the brilliance of the stars shine. In the darkness of our wilderness, there's a great light that we can see leading us home. Would you realize that everything in your life is meant for good? Would you not be a person living in the past, but would you keep your eyes looking forward? Would you be a person of hope? And you know what the city needs more than ever is hopeful people. We're a city losing hope, so would we be known as hopeful people as we fix our eyes on Jesus? Please join me in prayer.